Hi, Professor. I currently have Emma on the phone.
Yeah, it's like I don't know why voice does this to me, but it's like saying something keeps going wrong with the Zoom meeting. Everything else is working fine, like with my internet and everything, but
Oh,
it just saying something went wrong. The server encountered an internal error. It wasn't able to process.
okay. Well, like,
Yeah, thank you.
hmm. Hi, Professor. Currently just sent the Zoom link in our group me chat. Um, Emma's trying to get on right now. She's having troubles with the Zoom link. Amari should be on by 11:20. He texted us saying he was gonna be a little late. Um, yeah, so I guess we're still waiting for everyone. Um,
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Thank God. Oh my God.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. This is like, I hate Zoom. What's
No,
wrong?
no worries. I totally get it. Do you know if
I
uh
know, I don't know where everyone else is. I know Amari has court and will be here soon.
okay.
Um, but if not, we're perfectly good conversation.
Yeah, no, that works. Okay. Um, let's see.
How long are we
Do you
supposed to
wanna,
wait for people?
what'd you say? Sorry.
How long are we supposed to wait for people? Do you know?
Um, Give me 1 second. Let me check. I have the instructions right here. She said, don't wait more than 5 minutes for anyone to join late unless your group has been in contact with me about technical difficulties.
All right. So do you want to start or like,
Yeah, I'm down to start.
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah. All
just
right.
because we texted the group and everything, and
They
besides you,
didn't.
like, anyone else has
Yeah.
responded. Okay, cool. Um, I can start off with the first question.
Okay.
In what ways did the rhetoric, strategies, and decisions by Gore and Bush supporters of the 2000 election set a political precedent for the fallout of the 2020 election?
I will say I had like a harder time answering a lot of the questions on these because like it required a lot more like opinion pieces rather than like, just kind of going back into the podcast and like figuring out what I needed to say. So like I said for this one that the 2020 election and the 2000 election were like quite similar, especially in episode 4 with the recount disputes and protests outside the recount center, um, and how there was a lot of posturing and like protesting and pitting political parties against one another. Not political parties, just like pitting people against
Yeah.
the parties and everything. Like some military ballots, trying to swing the military vote and like all that jazz. And the toxicity of it kind of reminded me of like how the 2020 election played out. And I feel like both election stems kind of heavily focus on the disenfranchised and mail-in ballots. And COVID in 2020 definitely kind of impacted that for the Dems. And the stakes were so high in 2020 with like heavy anti-Trump sentiment and COVID that the battleground states and recounts drowned each other out. So it was not as like intensely focused on one state like in Florida. So like kind of like to go on to the next part of it, it is kind of like very easy to compare the two elections. I just feel like maybe 2000 was a little less extreme. I don't think it would have led to something like January 6th though.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I agree. A lot of things that like you touched on, like I also had in my notes. I talked about like how both elections they were or the media played like such a huge role in it, and um like I don't know if I mean in some ways you could argue that they did perpetuate, the chaos and everything, but I think also like just the public spread of like inaccurate information when it comes to just like elections in general and stuff like that was a really big thing in both elections. I guess like especially with the rhetoric surrounding like absentee ballots, especially the ones like from overseas and everything. Um, it kind of set like a political precedent for voters, especially those who were, full, like I guess like people older than us, who were able to vote in the 2000 election. Um, they were just it makes sense why they questioned the validity of the use of absentee ballots for the 2020 election, because like especially if you lived through the whole chaos of absentee ballots during 2000. Um, but I think also it's kind of interesting seeing like counts of the ballots in general in both elections was kind of like manipulated in a way that would, help a certain campaign or help a certain, and stuff like that. Because it was just kind of interesting seeing how like how Bush campaign team was all of a sudden like, oh, don't forget about the absentee ballots, like all this stuff. But then coming up to the 2020 election, like, um, the Republican Party was, I mean, at least like from Trump, like he was very against the use of absentee ballots, and um, there's also just like a lot of like misinformation surrounding COVID-19 at the time too, which also helped further perpetuate this like misinformation spreading. Um, And I think also just a lot of like strategies and rhetoric surrounding like, just having votes in general. I think was also a really big thing found in both elections. Um, yeah, and I guess just like the questioning of like the validity of like an election in general, I think was a really big thing in both.
That's so true. Because like I feel like I had to like just take some time to myself to think about it and like how similar they were and to see if it was a fair comparison. Because like, I don't think anyone really sees Bush as like, a like big overarching like evil figurehead, like cartoonish character. I mean, maybe back then, I have no idea because I was born in 2005. Um, but I feel like it was just like,
We're born 2005.
yeah, I'm a freshman.
Oh my God. Anyway,
I know
continue.
everyone's been calling me a baby. I'm a 19-year-old. It's fun. But yeah, so like it's just it's
Sorry.
very interesting to see how like I've talked to different people who were like alive back then. Like I had an old government teacher I talked to about this. I talked to my parents and they were like, "Oh yeah," like they remember how all this played out and all the chaos. Um, and like most of the people I talked to voted Democrat, so it was interesting to see different perspectives. Especially with what was her name in the podcast, Catherine Harris. Every time
Mm.
she came up, it was so like if you like go to the bottom when it was asking about like what things kind of like made you go oh my god like at the podcast she made me go oh my gosh every single time she popped up she seemed very like traumatized by the election but she was like it's just an election it wasn't a fiasco but I'm like that feels like a trauma response sort of.
Yeah, yeah, no, I agree 100%. Wait, sorry, we're on the second question, right?
Yeah, I'm just Reckendorf's emailing me. She says first she said it looks like it's not recording. And then she said it looks like I'm not on the Zoom. Hopefully I've created a new one and started. Please let me know who's recording, who has the recording once we're done. Are you recording?
When I joined, it automatically said like
Yeah,
recording.
it popped up with the message and I'm seeing it right now. I need to send her the Zoom link. Do you have the Zoom link we use? Because I just used the one in the document.
Yeah, that's what I used to.
Yeah, straight. She's like emailing me about that. I'm not sure. It says it's not
Oh,
recording on the end.
let me see if she emailed me about anything.
Yeah, I think it's like all of us right now. I don't know why it's not popping up as recording for her. That's so strange. I just want to be able to get this done and like not have to worry about it. It was a good
Yeah,
podcast. I enjoyed the first three episodes more than the last three. Um, I don't know, because I feel like I knew how the rest of it played out rather than just like the everything that led up to the weirdness.
and document sorry, I'm getting back to professor.
Yeah,
Um,
that's so weird.
yeah, no, this
Yeah,
is weird.
okay, everyone's having internet issues. Jared just texted saying he's having internet issues.
That's weird.
I feel like next time we should like meet up at a location and like record it over Zoom that way because like I feel like everyone's having like issues.
Yeah,
Work better or not.
yeah. Um, should we continue, I guess, or
Let's continue just in case it is recording, and if it's not, we can like find a way. We'll communicate with her. I just don't want to get a bad grade on this.
oh, I tried to click record and it says please ask the host to give you permission to record.
It's so weird. So she should be the host. Let me see. Huh. Record the cloud. Yeah, it should be going to her. Oh, Amari's here. Awesome. Can you hear us?
Okay, meeting is being recorded. Okay. Hi
Okay,
everyone.
good. The meeting's being recorded on your end too. That's
Okay.
good because
And then
it's
Dr. R is about to join. Hold on.
yeah. Because I don't know why it's like saying it's not recording. We just got through the first question.
Okay.
Okay.
So let me pull up. Hi everyone. I hope everyone's doing really well.
We're doing so great.
Okay. Where's Okay, so y'all just did the first question, correct?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, we can move on to question two. I feel like we got like a good amount of stuff out. So question two. At one point, Florida Secretary of State Katherine Harris, my faves, tells the podcast host that the 2000 election wasn't a fiasco like his title suggests. Instead, she says that the media created the fiasco. What do you make of Harris's assertion? I already kind of touched on this a little bit with
Mhm.
Annie. I feel like, no offense to Harris, I'm like, she was doing her job. But she seemed like a little unhinged and very defensive about some stuff and I don't want that to sound like misogynistic at all. Coming from a woman, it just did sound a little like, I'm like, you can calm down. It was something that happened over 20 years ago, And it
Right.
was like she sounded a little still too little angry about it. I would understand if it was like in the moment. But she says it's just an election in episode three, but it was anything but that, really. And like, if it was anything, just like if it was just an election, it would have been like everything else. It wouldn't have been this like memorable moment, like the 2000 election, sore loserman. Like that wouldn't be so memorable. So I feel like her reaction is trauma based and like having to constantly defend herself over the years, especially because of like decisions that were made in the moment that like reflect back on here even years later. So like, yeah, it was a fiasco. The media certainly didn't help. It probably just illuminated a lot of the absurdities that were happening behind the scenes that we might not have seen in like just any other election. So
Yeah. And I agree. I know I said like the media did play a big part in many ways for the election, like the way the election was perceived by the public. Um I think media's job in itself is to sensationalize anything. That's how you get viewers, that's how you get ratings up. So like
Mm.
the election in itself was already kind of a huge mess, but then the media did kind of make it into more than life um sort of thing. Um by just kind of highlighting the errors and the mishaps that were kind of going on, because I feel like without the media the public wouldn't have known um what like truly was going on, like the butterfly ballots. I don't think we would have known until it was reported on.
Mhm.
So yeah.
I think also it's like I could see why like could believe that the media created the fiasco because like technically she wasn't the one who like prematurely released like inaccurate election results, but at the
Yeah.
same time, like even if that was never published or whatever, and like they get down to that like margin, where it constitutes them to have like a Florida like recount of votes and everything. And so like that still very much falls under her jurisdiction, like as what, Secretary of State.
yeah,
And I think also like I think it also just deals with like the like unrealistic deadline she kind of set for counties too to submit their final vote. Especially if she knew that they were gonna have to do like a hand vote like recount and everything. Um
yeah,
and I think also like when she placed that deadline, she should have placed, standards on like how to recount it, or at least like some sort of, I don't know, initiative or action at least to like set the guidelines, set the standards of like, okay, here's what we're gonna do, here's how we're gonna count the votes and stuff like that. It was more of just like, okay, here's the deadline, good luck.
Yeah.
Um,
right.
maybe it's
I
not
thought that
under
was so funny.
yeah, and maybe it's not under like her, I don't know, department or jurisdiction, whatever, to like get the human resources, but someone should have stepped in to like make sure they had the human resources to try to even attempt this vote recount.
Right.
And I don't know if it's with the FEC or if that's with like the state of Florida. That's another thing to discuss. But yeah, it was just, I don't know. It was really interesting. I think also just like what you were talking about, Emma, like her reaction towards it, like it was very interesting that like most people that like was interviewed in the podcast, they were all very like, oh yeah, no, like that was
Like
like one of
it happened. We did what we did. I feel like she kind of is getting like a lot of unfair flack because like, of her political views and everything. And she was kind of like one of the head honchos, even though there were so many moving parts and there's so many people involved. A
Right.
lot of it does reflect badly on her, unfortunately. I thought it was interesting how like what was it, the second to last episode or the last episode? I didn't write it down, I think, where she's arguing with the host about the deadline, the certification deadline, where she's like, it was Friday. And then he like already said earlier in the podcast, he's like, no, if we have like, we fact check this, this was Sunday. He's like, well, she's like, you mean we can like argue about this all day? Like, maybe you're wrong, maybe I'm wrong, but you're probably wrong. And I was like, Why are you arguing about things like written down in history book now? It was so interesting. It felt like a little bad for sure. But at the same time, like it did happen over 20 years ago,
Right.
Like
and
a
I think maybe
Thanksgiving,
just like
like she thought she was gonna sign up for like a fun little, job with benefits, and then all of a sudden she gets launched into like the national sphere.
yeah.
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 I think it's interesting though, because like if you look at one of the later questions, they talk about like, were any of the things that happened like political? Like were any people's like motives political? I feel like everything was so political in this. It's an election. It's hard
That's
to
quite
separate politics from an election.
that's
Like
quite
it was,
literally what I said. Yeah.
yeah, like it's
Yeah.
very hard to separate politics from an election, especially her. Like even at like no matter how well intentioned anyone's motives were with like Gore and his environmentalism standpoint and like disenfranchisement, like it's all politics. Every decision you make, like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
Because someone
when you like,
loses in every decision made in politics. So it's like you have to be calculating a bit.
I
mhm.
think also especially with like how the US is set up to be like such a majority two-party system. So it's like
Right.
it's not for like if they're not for us, then automatically they're like against us. Whereas
Right.
like if you're in like a parliamentary government, like you can, supposedly have like political allies or whatever among like party lines, but in the US I feel like that's rarely the case.
Yeah.
It was just so interesting because of Florida in general. Hi,
Yeah.
Devon. We're doing question number two, and I feel like we can move on to the second part of that question,
Yeah.
wherever it is.
Um,
It's Justice Stevens, in his dissenting opinion, wrote that we may never know the complete certainty, the identity, with complete certainty, the identity of this year's presidential election, but that didn't stop the media from conducting forensic postmortems after all was said and done. What do you think about the media's assertion that they had a responsibility to investigate who really won? I
mm,
think personally, they're kind of right in that assumption to kind of investigate. A lot of weird stuff happened. And like, the pop, like it's always so weird when the popular vote turns out different than the electoral vote. So it's natural to be curious. It's natural to like try to investigate for the will of the people,
right.
and see what, like, what might have went down. Like, there's some weird stuff that happened with deadlines, weird stuff that happened with the butterfly ballot. I think it's okay for the media to have, you know,
And
done that.
I said the exact same thing. I was like, the media have the right to do it. The government and its like creation and fruition is supposed to be a public servant to the American people. So keeping that in mind, um, I feel like anything that the government does should not, well, not anything, but majority of things should be open for citizens to kind of question, to kind of inquire on, and to do their own research. So like, do I think like the media was researching out of like the goodness of their hearts? I don't think so. But it is like we are allowed to know exactly like who won the election. And I think Al Gore won it technically, but because of everything that went on, they just gave it to Bush. So, and I say that because of course mortems that were done. So it's just like I said, I think the media does have the right. Do I think they're doing it because oh my God, they love Americans so much? No, but yeah.
So I agree 100%. Like I feel like also with any sort of major event, whether it be political or not, like the media is always gonna conduct some sort of investigative deep dive or whatever. Like
Right.
even today, like I'm just thinking about like I think it was maybe either you, Emma, or someone else in another class, like Kate Middleton, for example. Like they have
Yeah.
so many like, news articles about like where's Kate, what you know what I mean? So I think it makes sense why the media thinks they had a responsibility to investigate who really won the election. And I think also with like journalism, how it's set up in the US, like they were kind of set up to be like the watchdogs or whatever of the government to kind of keep representatives in check.
Yeah.
There's like
So
important distinction amount like between like the types of media that report on these elections and do postmortems as well. So like the three major networks like they talked about in like the first episode or second episode, I think second episode,
I
with
think second, yeah.
ABC and NBC, all that jazz. Like that's a little different. Like those are kind of like political networks when it comes to elections and everything. It's different if something like NPR. It's different if it's something like like, I don't know. It's just like if there's like
Yeah.
tabloid reporting on something, or if there's like an actual like editorial newspaper, you know, if like it just I feel like if you go to like the bottom questions or whatever talking about like if there was social media happening, it's honestly just the media's job to make things worse at that point and dissect things in a way that they probably don't need to be dissected. And yeah, like you said with Kate Middleton, like I mean, you can believe whatever you want about the election. What matters at the end of the day is like what the outcome was 20 years later. I mean, Bush was president, wasn't he? Like that's what
Yeah.
happened.
Mhm.
Y'all have anything you want to say? We're on bottom of number 2.
I think
Okay.
I put like the media. I said this like the media had a right to the truth and to report the truth. But even though like they may never find an answer, as like Justice Stevens like alluded to with the quote, they still had like the job to report the truth back to us, like the people about what really happened that election and who really won. But they're never going to find an answer, unfortunately.
Which is so interesting because like Emma kind of stated earlier, Florida in itself was so crazy. Because I remember like one of the episodes, Bush was trying to stop the recount. However, it was not it was found out. It was he was trying to stop the recount, and then it was like some of the votes, or most of the Florida votes were going to Bush. So like he was trying to stop the recount, but he was getting more votes in Florida. Um, but then at the very end, when they said that they did the post-mortem, that Gore would have won out of I think 100 something odd votes. So I don't know, Florida, it's just, and being a Floridian myself, it's so like
It's messy.
bewildering, kind of. I don't even know like the correct word because I don't know what's, and like I see where the Supreme Court was kind of like we might not ever really know because even like with the postmortems done and with the recounts that did take place, it seemed like it seemed like Florida was kind of split a bit like for majority until the postmortems were done, and then they finally figured out who would have won by like that small of an error. I mean,
I
not error of
feel
margin.
like I feel like it's so interesting how like at the beginning of like, you know, the recounts, Gore cherry picked certain counties that like it like totally screwed him, you know, with like Palm Beach and everything and like those 2 other counties because like that like you could have and it just yeah, it
Yeah.
messed a lot of stuff up, unfortunately. And I feel like the election process could have gone so much smoother to the point where like it ended up in the hands of the Supreme Court and the decision was so outlandish in my opinion. I like
Yeah.
talked about this later in my discussion questions because like the dissenting opinion made sense. Like it's a state Supreme Court. Like it happened in one state. You know, this wasn't happening across the nation. It did not need to end up in the hands of the federal like Supreme Court. So
It's
it
also
just was very messy. Yeah.
yeah, it's also interesting too, just because I've taken like Augie's like constitutional law class and everything. Like it's really rare that the Supreme Court will take on such a politically charged case like this because
Right.
Yeah.
they're supposed to be, they're
They're like
unelected,
impartial.
they're for
Yeah.
life. So they're not supposed to be political. So it's I don't know, it's really interesting. I think I have a note here about I believe it was Justice Stevens who uh like the case was like moot essentially. Like we should have remanded it back to Florida, even though Florida didn't really, um do anything about it and everything. And yeah, I don't know. It's really interesting seeing like how where it's just not supposed to be political and definitely get political in certain aspects. And I think also I don't know if I'm just just already said because I was out for a bit, but I think also I agree with this something with there are so many different factors, external factors, especially that like neither campaign or like agency can control, especially when it comes to like the media and everything. Um, yeah, sorry.
It's all right. Jared, is there something you want to say?
No, not
No,
really. I feel
sorry.
like y'all
Your name just kept
I
popping
was
up.
just gonna like make sure the media is keeping politicians accountable. Honestly,
That's
but I
fair.
think
Do we want to move on to the other part?
Yes, we can do question 3. As you listen to the podcast, were there any arguments made by the Bush or Gore legal team or campaigns that you thought were more or less compelling? Is anyone getting like feedback on theirs as well, or is that just me?
A little bit,
A little
yeah.
bit.
If you were on the Supreme Court, how do you think it would have ruled in that case? I feel like, yeah, we kind of touched on that. Do we all like agree it's dissenting, or does anyone have like any dissenting opinions about the dissenting?
I don't know because is that me? Hold on, let me.
No, it's like everyone, I think.
Okay. So like kind of how do you think you would have ruled? I don't know, honestly, just because like both parties kind of made compelling cases when it came to like how Florida um extended the certification deadline. Like Bush teams believe that Florida violated the written law, and then Gore's team believed that they were just working within it by interpreting it because the Constitution, because of that law, it's kind of like limited in language. So like I think I would have ruled in Gore's favor just because many of the Constitution's laws have been interpreted and kind of expanded throughout the years to kind of help fit whatever was going on at the time. And I think pushing back the deadline, even though it might have like what's the word? Helped Gore, it could have also helped Bush too. Like by pushing it back and actually counting the votes to figure out, okay, what do the people want? I think that's where because I'm sorry, I'm trying to like formalize the words in my head. I think throughout the entire Fiasco podcast, I was definitely more on the side of just like counting the votes in its entirety. Like, because I think who wasn't it the news media that said Bush won in the first place?
Yeah, I think they reported Bush won, but then it went to the circuit courts, and then like either campaign team was going to fight it regardless.
Right,
So that's when it started to become a problem.
right. So I think just actually counting the votes to see exactly who I guess won Florida would have been the most accurate and precise thing to do. Because like I don't know. I feel like I'm in my head it makes sense, and I feel like I'm just like kind of jumbling words at you all. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I would have ruled in favor of Gore's team and just kind of um kept that certification deadline the way it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh.
Oh,
Oh,
sorry.
Yeah, I
Oh,
do think.
Oh, sorry.
no,
You can
No,
go.
go ahead. Seriously, go ahead.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I was I'm with you, Emma. I think I would have dissented, but I think also at the same time, like if I in the moment, I think also there was a lot of push from correct me if I'm wrong, was it Scalia, I think, who really wanted to take this case on. And it's really interesting seeing like we're talking about Sandra Day O'Connor and everything, how she had to cancel her vacation and stuff like that. Like it was, I don't know, it's really interesting seeing like maybe or say if Scalia wasn't on the court, like would things have changed or would have it or would another justice would have just been as adamant on, picking up this case like for, the rest of the country to hear and everything. And it's also just really interesting to seeing like Bush's lawyers, like in their petition to SCOTUS, they were arguing that like the Supreme Court improperly changed an election law put in place by the Florida state legislator. So I don't know, it's interesting seeing that like even though it was much a state issue, like I could see why they wanted to push it to the Supreme Court, like the national level. But at the same time, it's just I don't know, it's really interesting too because I believe they wasn't one of their arguments was that uh what was it? Something about equal protection.
Yes. Okay. I would love to talk about that in a second.
Okay,
Like,
yes, yeah, it was the equal protection claim. And so it was just interesting, like, because their argument was basically like criticizing like how US elections are run overall and how it's inconsistent and everything. And so with that logic, you would kind of think like, okay, so your argument is let's just redo the entire election. Like I'm not saying that like to an extreme, but it's like with the logic that they're presenting to the Supreme Court,
Yeah,
I
it was
can't
very
help
faulty.
it.
It was like extra proving that it really did not need to end up in the hands of SCOTUS, because like even like years later in the last episode, like last few minutes of the podcast, he says this Scalia later wrote that using the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause was a load of garbage. They did not, it was so ridiculous. Even Ginsburg was like, no, this is like, no, you can't, you don't need to do that. Like, because that clause has always been used in cases surrounding elections, like in like Shaw v. Reno, I believe, and like a whole bunch of other ones that have to do with like protecting minority citizens and whatnot. And it was used in Brown v. Board, and it's just very strange that they brought that up in this case, and like it made it so clunky to the point where like it didn't matter
Yeah.
the outcome. Like the conservatives ruled in a very strange way, and the dissenting opinions made the most sense. Like they were just like trying to jump through different hoops to make it seem like, this is all strange. I don't know. Oh gosh. And I felt so bad because like, it was a very tumultuous time on the Supreme Court just in general when they were talking about Sandra Day O'Connor's husband and just like in general. It really did not need to be dragged out to that extent. And then they eventually ruled like there's no point in even doing a recount again because there's no point. It's going to take too long. Yeah. Anyone else? All right. So the second part of question 3 says, as the election battles wound down, one of Gord's aides told him, it was wrong to shoot you, but you're still dead. In what ways were the courts, particularly the Florida Supreme Court and the U.S. Supreme Court, damned if they did and damned if they didn't? I kind of already said Bush was going to win no matter how hard Gore fought. To be honest, even if it was fair or corrupt or accurate or not, either campaign was going to be fighting whatever decision was happening. So literally the Florida Supreme Court, like it was inevitable that those two like very powerful campaign teams were going to drag it to the Supreme Court, but it was so unnecessary for them to do so was the
Right.
problem. Yeah, so they were damned if they do, damned if they don't. So poor Florida, RIP.
I feel like they were kind of blindsided a bit. Like both courts had to make that tough call when it came to fixing the mess because it was so confusing. Like many factors kind of made it difficult to figure it out, like the news outlets and going back to like the butterfly ballots. So I was like, oh God, sorry. So yeah, it was really weird. And then they also have the American public kind of beating down their doors demanding an answer. So like with all of that kind of piled up, I feel like Bush's team was just kind of the loudest, in my opinion. And then Gore's character was basically assassinated already. So like you said, Bush was gonna win anyways. Um, but by mediating and looking for the answers in the chaos, it's it was kind of yeah, like a damned if you do, damned if you don't, because someone was gonna leave the loser and someone's gonna be the victor. So
I feel like it wasn't talked about enough because I always thought this played a bigger role than it may have like actually done. Jeb Bush being the governor of Florida at the time always was so weird
Yeah,
for me.
so I was gonna mention that. I think also
Yeah.
like Amari, you were talking about like how Bush's team was, the so-called like louder one or whatever in the media. I think that also helps because he basically grew up in like a political dynasty, like where he
yeah,
already has those connections, he already has, those contacts to these, news media outlets and everything. And I think so like was it always in Bush's court? I don't know about that, but at the same time, I don't think it was ever in Gore's as well, just because I think also Gore going into the presidential election, he was really banking on riding the successes of his president Clinton and everything. I think also at the time Clinton was kind of,
under scrutiny. Yeah.
under hot water for
Always happens that way, like it always happens
Yeah.
whenever an election's approaching, there's something happening, like the Iranian hostage crisis. Like that's how like Carter didn't win re-election, and then like it turns out like weird, and then like with all this, like with the Homestead Air Base and the Elian Gonzalez situation, like everything just kind of piled up in very weird way towards the election that kind of made it almost impossible for Gore to have good standing in Florida. It
No,
was very.
I 100% agree. I think also like the tactics he was using to try to win Florida was very similar to Clinton's. And yes, while it may have worked for Clinton at the time, I think
You're
like
not George.
after
You're
seeing,
not Clinton, bro. You're not Bill
yeah,
Clinton.
exactly. Especially
I
after seeing
also
Homestead not really, being
right.
done anything to Cuban American voters were kind of like, okay, so this was kind of like a like, I don't know, Trojan horse in a sense,
Yeah.
just trying to get a vote.
Yeah, I feel like voters kind of catch on quickly to techniques after um it happens. So like how you said Clinton's technique, people catch on to that afterwards. So Gore trying
Mhm.
to like I guess fashion himself into Clinton just did not work, especially with his views on Elian Gonzalez. That already like the very first episode, I was like, you are
It was so messy.
Oh no,
so
I was close.
messy,
I'm not gonna lie.
so messy, and it's
I
like
was
you
in
lost.
shock.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
you already lost at that point, and I
you
felt really
already
bad for
lost.
him because it was like a situation that was completely out of his hands, and
Mhm.
that's the problem when you're running as a vice president,
Mhm.
because like you're still tied to that administration. Like Biden is still always like being brought back to like what he did in Obama's administration,
And
Yeah.
I think
which is
also
another way
like
this is comparable.
yeah, no, I agree. I think it's also interesting too seeing like Biden running for president now and how he's, trying to push all this legislation out and everything, just trying to prove, the efficiency of his administration. Whereas Gore, when he was running for president, he technically couldn't do that because he was working underneath Clinton. And so obviously Clinton, he's probably pushing out legislation and everything, but not really at the forefront of his mind thinking, oh, how will this affect Gore's campaign? Because, most likely he didn't really care.
Yeah.
I'm out. Like I'm literally leaving. And like I feel like Biden in like a comparable position here would be like everything happening in Gaza and the US's stance on that. And it's just like he's losing a lot of Muslim voters and younger voters because of that. He's trying to make up for it. Gore did the same thing with Cuban voters in Florida, and it's just
Yeah.
it's
And I
messy.
think even for like Biden for like the 2020 election, true, like me personally, I wasn't old enough to vote, but for me personally, I do think Biden only won because everyone was trying to get Trump out. So it's like if
Yeah.
you were able to like replace Trump with someone else, Biden being tied to Obama and like his views at the time and all that, I don't think Biden would have truly won any other way. Like he kind of ran during the perfect time when many people, many younger vote. I think 2020 was also like, didn't many young voters turn out for that too, or no?
It was a lot of young voters, but it wasn't as many as like Obama, I think, because like yeah, young voters are more incentivized and everything, but there was like a lot of problems with absentee ballots and whatnot, and young voters just felt very like
Yeah,
lesser of two evils minded, and they weren't enthused. There's been a lot of apathy just kind of growing, and it's become a problem.
yeah. I'm really, I mean, I'm getting off topic here, but like the 2024 election this upcoming year, I don't know how many people are gonna even like of us, our generation is even gonna show up to vote because they kind of
Not a
don't want to
lot.
do a part two. So
Not a lot, I'm gonna say. Let's see. Uh, in your opinion, was there any possible way the American public wouldn't view the actions of Bush, Gore, and the courts out of and other characters in the story as being politically motivated? I kind of touched on this. I
yeah.
think there was like no way that any of this couldn't have been politically motivated. Everything was political. No decisions were made that were not. Even Ralph Nader, like he's like these are like capitalist pigs and blah 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 blah. Like you're holding giant concert benefits, dude. This is
Yeah.
every motive you're making is political. He was because like even if he didn't even want to win, he was just playing spoiler for the fun of it. And it was weird and it's politically motivated,
I
Like
think
you're
people
not
get
getting any
bored, low key.
people get bored, but they don't understand their actions have like dire political consequences.
Yeah.
And like what happened, Just make it
Yeah,
even
I think
bigger
it
mess.
was 100% like politically motivated. Like I don't know how you couldn't view it that way. I know I already mentioned this earlier, but I think
Yeah.
also the two-party system in the US, it sets to make everything kind of political because it's like, oh, if this event happened and it's harming me, then it must have been like caused by the other, opponent, because who else are you gonna blame?
Right.
Um, And I think it's also really interesting to like when the people recount team asked the lawyer Heron to do research and write up a memo to like challenge the validity of overseas absentee ballots, and then like what, like a few days later that copy of that memo made it to like the Bush headquarters team or whatever. So it's, I think it's just like just seeing stuff like that, like you can't help but think like, oh, this is definitely political, like this is, it's something that seems out of like a TV show almost or whatever.
Such a mess. They talked about that later in the discussion questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
It's
insane.
a lot.
And I was like I kind of touched upon this earlier too. Politics in itself is a game. Like inherently, I feel like it's a game just because like no matter what decision is made, someone is losing. Like someone is losing. It could be like the smallest or the biggest. There's a loser. There's a loser. So like I feel like it's kind of hard to say it wasn't being politically motivated because at the end of the day, Republicans, Bush, they won. Al Gore, and I think what he was an environmentalist or whatever, right? That side,
Yeah.
they lost. So it's kind of hard to separate that when there's like no, even when compromises are being made too, because I kind of touched upon that. I was like, even when we see compromises between the two parties, there is still something being lost. So I don't
There's
know.
something motivating. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, no, I agree. One of the quotes I have is, I don't remember which podcast episode, so I apologize, but they're talking about Mark Herron, Gore's lawyer, talking about how Herron learned the hard way the recount was about much more than law. It was also about politics, means of influencing how the law gets applied. And which is really interesting
Yeah.
to see how the podcast kind of approached this memo from like a PR perspective, and how the Bush team, like they were pushing, this memo to every news media outlet there was, not to, win more votes or whatever, but it was more so just generating like public pressure in the media, and especially in, the common citizenry, to try to make the law work to their advantage and kind of, present the law in a way that would get people to put pressure on the courts.
Jared, Devon, do you have anything you want to say?
Nah, I think I basically got everything, especially like the blade ejector was
No,
a good one.
no. I also say, honestly, I don't think there's anything that they could have done where people wouldn't think it's politically motivated. I mean, it's politics, so what? Probably
True. Do we
talking about the election before the podcast.
I knew
there you go.
all of the following. Florida was the problem state. Jeb Bush was the governor of Florida and was the brother of J.W. Bush. The butterfly ballot. Gore was viewed as a little ridiculous after the election, and Bush eventually won. Like, I knew everything that happened during like the actual election, not everything leading up to it. Like Elian Gonzalez, I had no idea about any of that. I didn't know anything about the Homestead Airport. Um, just kind of knew like this is like very shameful for me to admit. I actually didn't know Al Gore was a real person until I was about 15 years old because I watched South Park. And in South Park, he warns about this mythical thing called the man bear pig, who is a plague to humanity and is like an allusion to global warming.
I know exactly what episode you're talking about.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I thought he was a made up character for the longest time. And then I get to like my A push class and I'm like, hey, what? I was looking around to see if anyone was laughing, but no, like this is a real guy. And like it's like such a little shameful secret of mine. I brought it up to my parents, and they're like, "Are you joking?" I'm like, "No." Like it's so
It's okay.
embarrassing.
I
but
fully
it's very
wrote
ridiculous.
in like the notes or whatever, I said I did not know much about the Clinton administration beyond the Monica Lewinsky scandal. I did not realize Gore was Clinton's VP. So you're much better off than I was.
Yeah.
You
No,
both are
like learning
much.
about this election early on was so funny for me because like it's entirely ridiculous, which is why I can't believe Catherine Harris thinks it's anything other than a fiasco.
Yeah. Yeah, you both are know way more than I did because unfortunately I didn't know anything. Like I knew Clinton and the Monica Lewinsky thing. That was kind of it. So like where my attention and my knowledge kind of started was Obama, 2008. That was the very first election I paid attention to. Um, because of a lot of factors, he was the first Black president. My family wouldn't shut up about it. Yeah. And then I started to pay attention to literally everything else after. And then when I'm in school, um, all they talk about is like kind of like elections from the 1800s. You never really sit and talk about the elections between like 2004 to like 19 whatever. They never, this is like the first class actually that has kind of got went back a little bit kind of to recent times. Um and it's so sad. I do need to learn more. So when we talk more about stuff like this in the future, I'm not sitting there looking at Emma in class like, okay.
Take an A-push class. That's how I learned everything. We went one election by one election by one election, and it just, yeah. And you get to learn all the political like things that were happening around those elections. Like if you take an A-push exam, it
Mhm.
ends on like the nuclear crisis in the 1990s, and
Oh,
it's
wow.
kind of explains everything.
Okay, I might need to do that.
But yeah,
'Cause yeah, I
that's
hate sitting
it's
in
chill.
class so confused.
No,
It's all
that's
right.
okay. The only other thing I knew about the election prior to listening to this podcast was that it was one of the, or it was the only presidential election that was decided by a Supreme
Popular.
Court. But I think that's also partly only because I took constitutional law with Augie in previous semesters, which by the way, highly recommend if you guys do end up taking him.
Yeah, everyone's been recommending that one class for me, so I'm gonna try to do that.
Yeah, no, he's a really good teacher. But yeah, I don't know, it's interesting. I think also like knowing that this happened before. Anyway, sorry, I lost my train of thought. We can move on from that one, unless someone else had something else they wanted to say.
It's too early, so I can't.
You should know anything about this
In
election
what
at all.
ways did the 2000 election kind of like seem like a scripted movie in Florida as a starring role? And like, how did it embody the perfect storm? I kind of said that as like Jeb Bush, Butterfly Ballot, Elian Gonzalez, Homestead Airport. Like it literally just had too many strange factors coming into play. So there was no way it couldn't have been like. I just think it's interesting how it came down to that one state though, because in the 2020 election, like I feel like there were a lot of states we had our eyes on, like Pennsylvania and Nevada, for example.
Or
So I
Michigan
think
was a really big one too.
hmm?
Oh, sorry, I was just agreeing with you. I was just saying Michigan, I remember, was also a really big one too.
And it was so cool because like I feel like Florida wouldn't be like a problem state. Like everyone knows like Florida typically votes red. I thought Georgia was cool because it turned blue. Um, we'll see what happens in this election, but like I just feel like it wouldn't come down to just one state anymore. And I think I said that in like another question with like the media and everything. Like it just wouldn't have come down to one state. Everything would have just been like all over the place because they didn't really have like stuff just like spreading like conspiracy theories spreading like wildfire recounts spreading like wildfire. They had like this one problem area, from what I know at least. And yeah,
Yeah, I just feel like that. What? Oh yeah. I feel like Gore. He had an easy way to win with the environmentalist, with him being an environmentalist himself. But I feel like he basically self-sabotaged himself with Florida. That situation, which led to him basically getting in this situation and losing.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think what I wrote, I said, their obviously their unique election laws that ultimately led to the vote recount kind of helped with that chaos and everything. But I think also their political demographics at the time explain why Florida was so at the front and center. Because at the time they were neither red or blue state. Like I think the presidential election for 2000 election was the first time they had turned blue. So it was very much like we're not sure where they're leaning right now. And I think their geographic location to other countries made issues such as like immigration like a higher priority or like issue of concern for voters in that state, which it helps explain why the events of like Elian Gonzalez made Florida such a hot state like in the media to begin with because it was kind of putting a face on I guess like political issues that were always being debated constantly like throughout the election cycle leading up to it. And I think also at the same time they're really unique in that obviously a large majority of residents there are like well off, middle upper class. Caucasian individuals. Whilst at the same time, they also have like a really crucial voting bloc in Florida, which is the Cuban American vote that they were talking about in the first episode. And just seeing how Moore was trying to, I guess, like balance both, and ultimately failed. It was pretty interesting. But yeah, I think there's a lot of different factors that make up Florida that helped it, become the state that it is in this election.
There's also like a lot of people like retiring age down there. And that's like what I thought was so funny with the butterfly ballot. Like you have all these old people like so
Yeah.
confused about this for I looked up the butterfly ballot. I don't think I would have been confused, but I understand why people are confused. It's like a weird looking ballot. And like
It's
the hanging
also
chads, the
Florida.
pregnant chads, the dimple chads, like Chad was brought up too many times in this podcast. Thank you very much. So it became like a meme. Like I mentioned this to like my physical therapist. I mentioned something about the podcast. He said, "Oh yeah, the hanging Chad." I said, "What?" He's like, "I was like, why?" And I forget that people were like alive and know about all this ridiculousness. I feel like it would have been funny to see like social media around back then because everything would have been such a meme. Like I want sore loserman on a shirt. Like I think it's funny. I feel bad for him, but sore loserman, that's too clever. I'm sorry. I also thought it was funny. What was it? The people who were protesting, the way to describe them, they're like all these kids that probably like daddy's money college, wearing khakis, never protested in college, coming up here looking a little cray cray. Like I thought that was such a like a weird way to describe them, but I'm like I can imagine it so clearly in my head. I feel like this kind of election definitely kickstarts like a movement of like polarization in a way, demonizing different parties and stuff, and it kind of like starts with um those sorts of protests and everything. And then like I feel like it kind of ties in well with the Tea Party as well because like you start to see more division around this time, and they start like and it just kind of is a catalyst for everything that happens now. Like there's so much division in our country. There's not like any sort of cohesion, and it sounds crazy, but 9/11 definitely brought the country together in like an interesting way. Yeah. So immediately after this election, like 9/11 happens, I'm like, that's like really messed up. But it didn't last forever, and plus it like kickstarted a whole bunch of like Islamophobia and just whole other problems. So, perfect storm, Florida,
I think we
2000.
can also like kind of compare what you just said about, Americans feeling united after 9/11. I think I mean, I guess depends, but for the most part, like I feel like most Americans were feeling that sort of like, oh, let's stay at home, like social distance for each other and stuff like that. It was also interesting though, because at the same time there was like a bunch of rhetoric
Yeah.
surrounding is COVID-19 real and stuff. So it's
Yeah.
like, um,
And it also creates like a lot of like, Asian hate crimes as well. And that was like, wow, it's too many similarities at that point.
It reminds me of
yeah.
2013 with Ebola. Like that was
Oh my God, I forgot
living
about
through
COVID
that
is
was
what we
such an
thought Ebola was
experience.
gonna be. We thought like Ebola was gonna be COVID.
You know what? I didn't think Ebola was ever going to hit us. However, like the harmful in 2013, I think I was in fourth or fifth grade, and I was paying close attention to that because literally I was being called like it was so bad because Ebola came or
I'm sorry.
because it like originated from Africa, I believe. Everybody was calling like me Ebola and like stuff like it was a lot. It was a lot. So I had to pay attention to it because I needed to like make sure kind of like, okay, when is this gonna end? So like not being hurled with racial slurs. So like, yeah, no, it was a lot. It was crazy. It was so crazy. But no, that just reminded me of like 2020 when the Asian hate crimes happened with COVID. And then like you also said too, with 9/11 bringing the country back together right after this election. I definitely feel like, and maybe we're getting into like conspiracy theories, but I
It
definitely
is
feel
a
like after.
conspiracy theory. Because everyone, I was thinking about it. I was like, you know what? Maybe it did bring the country together, but everything I think about now when it comes to 9/11 and this election is like how many, like, it's a meme, unfortunately, because
Yeah,
people are like, "Let's do 9/11." And it's so funny that came up immediately after the election. Not funny because like
but
people
it's
died and it's absolutely
convenient.
terrible, but it's so wild that like social media wasn't around back then because
Mhm.
the amount of things that would have like just over and over again after this election, people saying Bush did 9/11, the conspiracy theories, like this time period, just like this whole little like couple of years are very weird to just hear about from a perspective of someone who was not alive back then. And
Yeah.
then seeing the similarities of stuff that are happening now.
So much was happening around that time too. I feel like because
We
we
only
were
have
being
10 minutes
introduced
left.
to what's that thing called? Oh, that thing, the internet, and we were having like chat rooms and stuff. It kind of heighten people's like craziness. Like I remember my older cousin, he was alive during that time. And that Bush did the 9/11 joke. That was he was the first person I ever heard it from. He was like, "Yeah, I was on chat rooms and they were saying like Bush did 9/11 and that the guys on the plane was actually like he's crazy. I actually need to check up on him." But yeah, it's just so funny thinking about it.
It's like a perfect storm, like it's
Yeah.
described. Because like 2000 election happens, 9/11 happens, the conspiracy theories are still flying, and I feel like the political polarization in that country couldn't have like been any worse. And then it got worse,
Yeah. And
without
then
us even
also
noticing.
to touch on it, I know that you said earlier with like Bush and or their like parties kind of being the first, or maybe not the first, but at least I'm gonna say in like this instance, the first of its kind to really stand behind their candidate and to kind of do like a them versus us mentality sort of thing. Because like after like listening to the podcast, all the remnants of is it me? Am I do I have feedback?
No.
Oh.
Jared, I'm so sorry. I think it might be your mic. I feel so bad.
Probably, but we only have like 10 minutes left, so
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so basically the remnants of like what MAGA was just like a supersized version of, in my opinion, Bush's team. And I only say that because Bush's team stormed the voter counting place to make sure that nothing crazy was going on. I want to say that was episode,
That wasn't his team though. That was just like a whole bunch of people on like
or
different
not his
campuses.
team, but yeah.
Yeah.
Protesters.
And that's the part where it became kind of like weird
Yeah.
for me. Um, Unexpected turns, often ironic twists. I couldn't find anything like ironic. The only thing I could find like ironic was like the equal protection clause being used in the by the conservatives in the SCOTUS decision. That was like very strange for me. But I feel like
Yeah,
overall,
no,
like,
that's what else put down.
yeah, like no one was completely innocent in this election. There was a lot of messy cover-ups, like backtracking, recounts were just weird, and I feel like no one came out innocent or unscathed on the other side. And I feel like that's just kind of how every election's coming out now. Like
Yeah.
people hate Biden, people hate Trump, people are gonna hate whoever comes out alive on the other end of this, and it's just kind of inevitable at this point. And I feel like this election kind of kickstarted that kind of little movement. People still hate Jimmy Carter for how they think he handled the Iranian hostage crisis. But I'm like, honestly, even after stuff came out about that kind of revealed certain truths, people still are like, he wasn't that good of a president. I'm like, that man was the first man to put solar panels on the White House. Calm down. Like, like they remember all the bad and never any of the good. People think that Biden sucks. He's the most liberal president we've ever had, whether you like that or not. And it's just no one's going to come out unscathed on the 2020 election. No one came out unscathed in the 2000 election.
Yeah.
Um, any maddening moments? Catherine Harris, my favorite. The amount of recounts that happened, I feel bad for her. She was doing her job, unfortunately.
Yeah,
For
she
me,
did a poster job.
it's just like the fact that she couldn't admit, like, oh yeah, maybe I could have like done some things better, you know? Let's just leave it at
Even the
that.
lady that was like in her position beforehand or something like that. I can't remember what her name was. It was like the Winchester lady or
Oh,
something.
like
I
her
wrote it down.
mentee or something like that,
Yeah,
right?
it was so like even she's like, what the is she doing? Like it was so bizarre. You know who I
No,
thought was kind
I
of funny
remember.
was Donato Dalrymple in the second episode because he like stuck around a little
Yeah.
too long, hanging
Way
around
too
Elliot
long.
Gonzalez, and he was like, I felt responsible for him. Like I wanted to get in that van with them, make sure he sees a familiar face. I'm like, you rescued him. You did like a good
So,
thing.
and I looked up the image that like they talked about in the podcast and my
Me
jaw
too.
dropped. I was just like,
Wait, which
Yeah.
image?
Oh, the guy in the closet, like,
Yeah, and
What?
he's holding Elion, like, because remember they're talking about like how
Oh, right.
feds like came into
Oh
Elion's
my
house
God.
trying to like get
yeah,
him, and he was like, "No, you can't take away this kid from me," and basically grabbed the kid and like went to a closet of all places to hide from the feds. And there's an
That's
image of
crazy.
like guns like
yeah.
shooting like pointed at the kid, and
Poor kid.
yeah,
I, I mean, he had a bit of a white savior thing going on, but I mean, he meant well.
no, it
Um,
was
Jesus
given very
Christ.
much like America's here to save the day. Like it was.
it was insane.
Oh my God, that's so unfortunate. Wow. Any less
Yeah.
thoughts, questions, comments, or concerns? Because this was weird.
I think
Um,
the most, oh, I'm sorry.
oh no, go ahead, go ahead.
No, I would just say I think the most maddening thing for me was at the very end of the series when the narrator stated that the Supreme Court kind of just gave the presidency to Bush. Um,
Yeah.
it astounded me in a way. It astounded me because I kind of felt like the American people's voices were a bit discarded. Now that's not to say Bush would have won in the end anyways, but America kind of pushes this ideal, you need to vote, your voice matters. So during the 2000, and like I said, I know the 2000 election was so confusing. There were so many like moving parts. So they kind of just had to do what they felt was right. But still, it made me feel like, um, and I said what's even crazier. Okay, so someone correct me because maybe I didn't listen to that right. Did Gore, when the postmortems were done, did Gore win the presidency or did he not win it? Like, because I thought that's what they said after the postmortems were done and they fully recounted it. It showed that Gore won by a margin.
I think they said Bush won,
Okay, it might
right?
have been Bush, and then in that
I
case,
might be wrong. It was a very small margin, like 200s,
right. Well,
but I
Dr.
might be
R,
wrong.
if you see this and I was wrong, I'm so sorry, friend.
Hi,
Um,
Dr. R. We're sorry.
but assuming that Gore won, I was like, this creates kind of a separate timeline in which Gore should have been president. And that kind of left me feeling more bewildered because by Florida pushing the time back, it seemed the right choice to do. Like we were trying to get the accurate votes. But I know it would have taken a bit longer. However, the president doesn't get sworn into office until January of the next year, right?
Well, that's what I was thinking. I was like, how
Yeah.
much
Keep
like
recounting.
Yeah, like just it I don't know, but
I think one of the
But didn't they have
most
like the deadline, like December like 12
Yeah,
something?
they had like a whole bunch of deadlines. And the thing is, I was so bewildered by like the amount of recounts that were happening. Like they recounted a certain amount of states and then they recounted all the states. And then they were like, okay, so maybe we don't have time for a recount, but we're gonna extend this deadline for this recount. I'm like, oh my God. It was
yeah.
just so
And why
ridiculous.
didn't they just count the messed up ones? Because I know that was talked about. I was like, just count up the messed up one. You already, I don't know.
I no, but that's where I was kind of like, I understand why, like, I understand, like, wanting everyone to be enfranchised, including the overseas vote. However, it was weird that, like, they wanted to consider stuff that is, like, improperly. Well, it's about the intention of the citizen. It shouldn't be, like, about, like, the hyper specific, like, election laws. I'm like, there are election laws in place for a reason. And, like, even the Bush campaign was like, y'all are changing the rules after the game has already been played.
Right.
And I think that was like in the second to last episode, maybe the last episode. And like I'm kind of like on their side, unfortunately. I'm like, you're just making it more convoluted than it needs to be. And like I understand extending deadlines is one thing, but then like changing the rules completely, including stuff with wrong marked postage, and like making it about the intention of the voters rather than the actual law that they did not follow. That's very ridiculous, and it just did not need to happen that way.
Right.
I think also like the most maddening part for me, I think it's still I talked about it earlier, but it just goes back to like Harris's, I guess, lack of preparation in terms of getting the resources to these counties to start the recount. I don't know, it was just like in my head, it's just like if you set a deadline for something and like plan for it, and you're also the head of elections for your whole state, like why wouldn't you make sure that there were systems in place to actually have it done and follow the same standard and at least like have all the counties on the same page, like just to begin with and not, um Yeah, or at least had a meeting with like each county's like canvassing board or something. Like, I don't know.
Yeah. It's this whole entire, I will admit, the podcast where
So weird. And I feel bad for her. They were talking about, I looked up the picture and Jesus Christ, her makeup. It was weird. I felt so bad. Like
yeah.
she like I don't know how new she was to the job, but like she did kind of become a meme. She would have been like the biggest meme if this happened in 2020.
Luckily it didn't though, because Jesus Christ, so many the debates that would have happened, literally it would have been Twitter's already insufferable. So imagine Twitter in like 2000. God.
Imagine TikTok.
Oh my God. I
Definitely.
don't even want to imagine it, right?
I don't even want to think about TikTok. I just think it's ridiculous they're trying to ban TikTok. They weren't concerned when it was Musically
I
and
don't
the
think,
Chinese
well,
getting our data. Like, come on now.
I don't know if they're gonna ban it though. Like, I feel like, because hasn't TikTok already been up for discussion for ban? Like, I've heard TikTok's gonna get banned since like 2020. Like,
And it doesn't, they're
Some
too old
guy
to
from
know
Shark
about it.
Tank wants to buy it. Like, it's so dumb. Some guy from Shark Tank wants to buy it. Isn't named like Mr. Fabulous or some shit. I don't know.
oh,
It's a ridiculous little discussion that's happening. It's also hypocritical because a lot of the people who are voting against it, Biden, being like, "Yeah, I'll sign it if it comes on my if it comes across my table." He's using TikTok for
TikTok,
like his
yeah,
campaign platform. It's very weird. I think it's interesting that it's a bipartisan issue, but then like you have people who were like on such far ends of the spectrum. You have Marjorie Taylor Greene and AOC agreeing on not banning TikTok. That is
I
very
noticed
weird.
that and I was like, this is weird,
That is
y'all. Like
weird.
I was listening
Like,
to her,
bro,
yeah, I was listening to Marjorie, oh my God, Marjorie Taylor Greene's like testimony she gave or whatever. And a part of me was like, am I tripping or am I actually like agreeing with this girl? Like,
why is she making sense? God damn it.
yeah, like in a way,
I hate
like
it.
kind of outplayed us in our own game of capitalism, that in my opinion. And they just want
A broken
like,
clock
I
is
don't know,
right twice a day.
yeah, control, profit, yeah. And I get the whole like data and everything, but every American like company, like no matter what you use, even Canvas, I'm pretty sure uses our data. Like it's
yeah.
just inevitable. Yeah, I know this is way off like topic of like the podcast, but yeah.
I think it's interesting.
Yeah, like we became like a little off topic, but it's all right. We're like time's about up.
Yeah.
Um,
Do
this
we
was
need
a
anything? Like, do we need to send the recording to her or how does that
No,
work?
we just, oh, I didn't even tell y'all.
where's her cloud?
She texted me. She said, I sent her the link. She said, she was like, you're in an old room, the link from last time, no worries. Tell your group to ignore my emails and carry on. So I'm assuming she's able to access this. She knows what link that we're in. She knows what,
Oh, okay, cool.
Okay.
Oh yeah, we're using the old link. Why are oh yeah, because like that's the only one I saw. It was the one that was
Yeah,
underneath the
I didn't know there was.
I didn't know either.
Mm.
So
yeah, all I'm seeing is how the Tea Party captured the GOP link.
yeah. I mean, she knows where we are, so I'm assuming it's fine.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool,
But
good stuff.
this was fun.
Hmm.
I enjoyed talking to y'all. This is great.
Yeah.
All right. See you all Thursday.
Bye, I'll see
Bye.
y'all
Bye.
Good
later.
political theory. Bye.